I'd like to continue with our consideration of doubt in science. And I'd like to use as a means of considering that seriously Charles Darwin, because the tendency is to think of what Darwin discovered as true, as factual. And indeed, I struggle with that impulse myself. We have to keep in mind that the discovery of things in the world continues. Darwin encountered not only a living world, but a past world through explorations of what lies under the sea, work by great men named Hutton, Platek, and Lund, who had explored areas of the sea and found that fossils in various areas resembled each other if the areas themselves were similar. And fossils in other areas resemble themselves if the realm proved to be cordial for that kind of creature. That's an historical insight. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. And this enabled Darwin to see that the wide variety of animals and plants in the world now can be explained by that immense amount of time for them to have developed. That resulted in a wonderfully time-spanning vision of mutations, accidental mutations, most of which resulted in creatures that couldn't function in this world and therefore died off, but a great variety of which resulted in creatures that were cordial in the areas in which they were born and prospered there. Well, all that's wonderful, and down through the years since Darwin, there have been many emendations and changes. But I'd like to stop down on one today that's in fact stunning, that most of us don't know about, that happened about 250 million years ago. Whoa. What happened 250 or so thousand years ago? Million years ago, not 1,000 years ago. This is a time period millions of years before dinosaurs come into existence. And we, inheriting from Darwin, have tended to think about a progression up the level of creatures from one-celled entities to multi-celled entities to complex configurations, creatures in the sea giving rise to amphibians, which ultimately gave rise to, we think, reptiles, out of which the dinosaurs emerged. Well, it turns out that back 250 odd years ago, 250 odd million years ago, there were creatures on this planet, primarily in what is now South Africa, creatures on this planet which were warm-blooded. Before the dinosaurs, which are cold-blooded, we think, warm-blooded creatures existed. Now, that's something that was recently discovered. They're called synapsids. Synapsids, warm-blooded. Their flesh is not like our flesh, perhaps. Their skin was not like our skin. But they were warm-blooded animals. Some of them were herbivores. They fed on grasses and leaves. And indeed, the most fearsome of them was a carnivore. And they found the head of one of them. It was like a rectangular box, not the shape of head that we have, head like a rectangular box. And in the front of that rectangular box, there were huge fangs. It was a meat eater, a version, if you will, of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, but millions of years before it existed. The world at that time was going through horrific disturbances, huge volcanic eruptions. The kind of change in climate that we are now going through in a short amount of time, taking a long amount of time. Some creatures would survive and others would die off. Until now, we've had the idea that large creatures, carnivores, die off first under such circumstances, and the little ones survive for a while. This discovery in itself suggests that that's not so necessarily. That huge synapsid with the fearsome teeth was sort of like an early version of a tiger. Maybe about the size of the biggest tigers we have. And it functioned as a warm-blooded creature before those reptiles evolved. Whoa. That forces us to think of amending the Darwinian idea again, much more than it has been amended in the time from Darwin's writing of this, about 1859. From that time, until now. Oh, we here see that in fact, science continues and continues to evolve and change. Darwin did magnificent work on the influence of several people who preceded him with evolutionary ideas. His own relative, Erasmus Darwin, for example, being one of them in the late 1700s. Darwin's in the middle 1800s doing his work. He's doing his work in the 1830s, late 1830s, moving on. So there were influences that produced him and influences that are going to produce those who emanate his work. That's one of the ways in which things change. Now, you may think, oh, well, change obviously on the biological side here on Earth, but nothing changes in that external universe and the understanding we've reached of it, which I suggested was anticipated by that stunning author of Genesis 1:1, Bereshit. Well, we put that telescope up in the sky, and one of the things that telescope managed to capture was a galaxy, actually two galaxies, a relatively few 100 million years after the Earth, after the universe started. A few 100 years after the universe started, we thought there were chemicals forming. These two galaxies existed. Yes, they're much simpler than our galaxies. But there they are. Close to that 13.77 billion years ago that we think the universe started out of not anything, no time, no space, but in the non-temporal extension of that not anything, probability tells us that the most improbable things will happen. And one of the most improbable things that might happen in not anything is something. Whoa. Something coming into existence. Now think about that for a moment. That's the equivalent of physical discovery of what requires us to amend our understanding of things here in the physical universe. Into which Einstein gave us the most profound insights that we've managed to have thus far. Will his work do something with those two new discoveries? I don't know. Physicists are working on it. What will they come up with? Oh, what an exciting world this is, in which such physical discoveries transform the way in which we apprehend and understand our place in things. Our minimalist, ultimately meaningless place in things. Unless you have faith and religion, and that's fine. But if you don't, what you can do is reformulate the way in which we apprehend rules in the world. One of the wondrous things we can do is try to understand how we ought to relate to each other in light of that colossal temporal distance, in light of the fact that we think we're standing still and are actually whirling at immense rate of speed around the sun, which is whirling around a more immense in a more immense speed around the center of our galaxy, which itself is, of course, whirling. In all that, we try to understand. And one of the ways in which our understanding is affected is by the discovery of new things, which sometime might involve a thing getting uncovered and we pick it up, and sometimes might involve inventing a mechanism that now allows us to see more, understand more. Galileo had that telescope. Van Leeuwenhoek thought of that microscope. But nobody thought about throwing a telescope up into the stratosphere, for crying out loud. And so the discovery of those two galaxies only millions of years after the creation of the universe could be in part said is the result of our getting a more accurate kind of telescope. And so we increase our knowledge by inventing more subtle entities, and we increase our knowledge by falling upon things that haven't been seen before, either using such instruments or by accident. Some earthquake opens out an area that we hadn't seen before, and we become capable of understanding what it is that's happening, that has happened in this world, which is the tiniest conceivable part of that immense universe. Let's call it one of the tiniest. And here you and I are, enjoying our contact with each other, what this world is, how it functions. And then how we place in that realm which was originally not anything, and in which a universe came to be infinite at the very start. Infinite at the very start? Is is that possible? Yes. And I can illustrate that very easily using numbers. The moment you think of moving from 0 to 1, you're in an infinite sequence. 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on. We'll talk about that down the line. But for now, we're introduced to another realm. Those warm-blooded creatures that lived 250 million years ago when the world was undergoing millions of years of climate change that drastically killed off vast numbers of creatures, including these, out of which perhaps somehow we evolved. How did those mammal-like creatures proceed through the realm of dinosaurs? We're still struggling to understand that one, dear friends. Thank you for being with me. I'll see you next time.